I said I'd never return. I lied. Welcome back to the ongoing coverage and analysis of Dune Awakening. In this edition of Dune News, we're going to be going over the PirateSoftware interview with lead game director Joel Bylos. We got a lot of cool stuff to talk about. There were some revelations that we weren't aware of before that have been made concrete. Lots of tasty info to talk about. So we're going to pour through the interview. I'm going to interject every once in a while with some commentary on some things, but all in all, we've reduced this hour-and-a-half long interview down to about 17 minutes. So without further ado, let's get right on into it.
So tell me a little bit about the game. Like, I am itching to know more. I know there's base building. I know there's going around the desert, and I know you're going to die to a worm. Like, eventually, this will happen.
The beta has a great Discord channel called Worm Survivor Support Group, which I really appreciate because then everyone shares their stories of being eaten by the worm. But yeah, so I mean, the game is like survival MMO or open world multiplayer survival. Like, it's sort of trying to hybridize. Like survival games have this great loop of like obstacle overcome, obstacle overcome, obstacle overcome. How does a game like Dune tie into a survival loop, and then how does that become sort of an epic end game? So you start in the desert and you build your way up towards this kind of house level or faction level conflict. So the game it starts out like a traditional survival game, I would say. It has an opening sequence which is about 10-15 minutes long that sort of takes place in single player and gives you a grounding in the basics of the world. And then we dump you into this area of the world called Hager Basin. You've got to deal with sun, you've got to deal with sandworms, you're scrabbling for water, you don't really have any resources, and you don't really know anyone because the ship that crashed and left you here on Arrakis was a prison ship on its way to a slave camp on the planet. And then you just kind of have to make your way in the world. Like with all good survival games, it's sort of about overcoming those hazards and getting stronger.
The interview starts off with some easy softball questions covering some of the basics about the game, but then it moves into some more detailed information. For instance, we start talking about solo play here.
Do you think it's possible to play a game like this solo?
Yeah, a lot of people do play that way, like especially in the beta. You know, we track people and see how they play. There are big guilds, and there are people who play alone. They can join factions. If they want to participate in the political system, the Landsraad, you can just create a guild of one and then still pledge yourself to one of the houses and then still participate in the Landsraad in that way. So you can still do it as a solo person.
I'm interested in like server persistence, right? So let's say this is taking on place. Is it all one giant server? Are these a bunch of clustered servers? Is it like a match round? Like, how does this function?
Let me tell you a tech story because I think this is fun. We started out trying to make a singular world with server meshing. I don't know if you've heard of Atlas.
Yeah.
The game, but yeah, so we were looking at like, okay, a map like that, but stitched together with all the servers like talking to each other and allowing people to flawlessly cross servers. And we realized that this was just too much content to make. So we ended up keeping that concept. So we have this place called the Deep Desert, which is a map that has server meshing. It has 9 meshed servers working together. And then we have other maps that are persistent 40-person survival maps, and we have multiple versions of those maps. So in a way, instances, but not exactly an instancing system. And those all connect to the same social hubs and the same deep desert. So in what we call a world, there might be, let's say, 20 of the Hager Basin South map, where you can have persistent buildings. Then you can go to the Deep Desert. The Deep Desert itself is also persistent as a server mesh. Every week, the giant Coriolis storm happens. It changes the landscape. So every week, that Deep Desert actually changes. And then the social hubs themselves are also instances, so people can go there. Once they hit a cap, they'll instance to a new version of the social hub. You know, Rust has this fantastic server reset mechanic, and it drives this race between people.
Yeah.
We were talking about how we could also like, what is the Dune version of this? And the Coriolis storms are a fantastic, mechanic in and of themselves, right? You can sort of make choices about, well, what do I want to bring with me? What do I want to do out there? And of course, we put very tempting things out there for people.
We hear a little bit more about how the Deep Desert is going to work here, but we're still a little muddy on exactly how the Hager Basin system is going to operate between servers. The interesting thing here is the Deep Desert mechanics that we get a little more information on.
How hard is it to extract items back out of the deep desert area?
Yeah, no, to get the resources out, you actually have to travel with them. So it's logistics, right? And so there's a little safe section at the bottom, which it's a PVE strip, so people can enter the area without getting just destroyed by anyone waiting to ambush them. And the further north you go, the higher the percentage of spice blows and things that you'll encounter that are actually worth a lot of value to you. So the idea from our end is this thing we call the Coriolis race. On a Tuesday night, the Coriolis storm happens, and that resets the map. And then on a Wednesday, Thursday, guilds send out their scouts. You have this system called the cartography system in the game, which means you can scan areas of the map. You can actually print your own maps and then share them with people in your guild, and the people in your guild can just apply them, and then suddenly they'll have all the information. So the idea is to create this economy of, map sharing.
That's a super compelling gameplay loop for me. I've seen that done in like kind of other games. If you're doing a weekly reset, there's always going to be a market for that. If you want to go be a cartographer, you can.
The idea is you can put those maps on the exchange for other players to buy, and how reliable you are as a map maker. Like if you go around and use the scanner, which is a manual kind of scanning of the environment, you actually mark off where resources are on the map as well. So maps will have value inherently. Some will be more valuable because they'll have more resources marked, some won't. But then the scouts are marking areas where they're seeing spice blows, where they're seeing high tier resources, where they're seeing uncovered dungeons that weren't there the week before, right? Where they're seeing shipwrecks that have been uncovered by the shifting sands. And then they're going back to their guilds and saying, okay, this is what's out there, right? Guilds get out there, they start building bases on the islands that are closest to the things that they want, because as the cycle ramps up for the weekend, then suddenly you have a lot more activity out there in the deep desert. Is we have this system called the Landsraad, and the Landsraad are asking people to do specific things each week to earn votes, and those votes are used to set a server rule for the week. And that means that our tradies in Harkonnen will be competing for the right to set a server rule that applies to the entire world across all groups. I also want to have a third faction. Might happen just after launch, but there's a planned third faction as well.
We get a little more insight about the Landsraad system, which is going to be the engine for the entire endgame of Dune Awakening. It's going to drive the competitive parts of the deep desert PvP. We even hear a little bit more about this rumored third faction that should be dropping just after launch. But we're about to get a very interesting piece of information that a lot of players have been wondering about.
When we talk about like a server rule, like what does that mean?
Sure. One of them can be that for your faction, for the rest of the week, everybody on your faction on all servers in that world has 25% reduced crafting costs. Or for a 1 week, there can be a decree that says the right of salvage in the deep desert is that everybody can loot everything from everybody.
That's right. We finally have confirmed that full gear loot will be a possibility in Dune Awakening. It will be reserved, however, to a resolution or a Landsraad vote. This is great news for PvP players, as many have voiced concerns about the lack of mention on the gear looting system and whether or not they'd be able to take other people's equipment. Now we have concrete evidence that this will be the case, but you'll have to earn it.
One of the things I was thinking of, people were talking in chat, like, can you doctor maps and things like that? Can you forge them to make it look like there's a resource there?
So no, there's not the custom changes to the map. We didn't add that yet. It was discussed. It's just sort of been out of scope for launch. But like, you can sell people maps with a thing revealed that like is really cool. Like, hey, here's that eco lab that has this, rare chance of a drop. Of course, you just have your entire guild waiting there for.
This concept of falsifying map information in order to mislead players into situations where you might be able to spring an ambush on them is a very interesting one. We're hoping we get to see more of this unveiled and developed on as the game progresses, but it's going to be a very interesting thing to be able to doctor something that will eventually lead to someone going into a place they shouldn't be in order to take advantage of them or gain some sort of a competitive edge.
One of the other things about that too is, what happens when that is mined out?
It's not first come, first serve. There is a lock that I think comes down after a few days. So the doors to the eco labs will be closed off and then unlocked at a certain point. So people can find these spots first before they become unlocked. And so you can have a little bit of competition over those areas. Inside, like, you have both regular schematics and then you have schematics that require Imperial permits. You find these schematics, these unique schematics that you can craft, but you can only craft them once, and then the schematic is absorbed.
In terms of that, of getting like very high value loot and things like this, what tools do players have in order to protect that inside of their bases? And what kind of counterplay do I have, say, if I wanted to be a spy and I wanted to go steal something from a certain faction? I go and join them, I befriend everybody, I infiltrate their organization and steal things out. And what can I do as an organization runner to stop them from doing such a thing?
There's not a lot you can do as an organization runner. I think that we kind of want this kind of gameplay to a certain extent. Of course, you have permission systems. As a spy, you have to try and social engineer your way to the top.
Here we get a little bit more concrete information about the permission system and how it's going to be used to keep certain members of guilds out of certain areas in order to safeguard some of the more precious information or materials that a guild wants to keep locked away.
Okay. What is the monetization model? Do you guys actually have one that you've made public, one that you're willing to talk about?
I know that we're going to have a one-time fee for the launch game. I know we're not going to have a subscription. There'll probably be some sort of monetization in the game, but I think there'll be more details to come. To be honest, I'm just not allowed to say much yet.
Is it pay to win or not? Is really all that it comes down to.
Absolutely not. We won't be doing pay to win.
That's good. I think that's always going to be the biggest concern, especially with any gaming community, is your game pay to win? This looks cool, but it would be ruined based on a pay to win anything. So that's really good to hear. I was worried about that too, especially when you have so many PvP elements. I think the PvP elements really drives home that pay to win would be like a really big negative for that. So good.
It's good to know here that Joel and the Funcom team are not interested in a pay-to-win model, which we have seen ruin many, many good games that are promising, but are unfortunately tarnished by an unfair and seemingly needless system to allow players to pay their way to the top. So this is good news to know that Dune Awakening is not really going to be invested in such systems.
Is there an opportunity to siege, say, another person's base?
So bases have shields. As long as you keep them fueled up, people can't really attack your base. Occasionally, a sandstorm will take down a shield. In the deep desert, if you have a base, there are times when a sandstorm passing over may cause your base shield to go down. In that window, people can attack your base. And it's kind of randomized, so maybe only during prime time hours and things like that. There is a possibility. It's not highly encouraged in the game, I would say, but there is opportunity windows in the deep desert. And the deep desert is a place where everything gets wiped every week anyway.
This is another huge piece of information about base rating, something that we've been told through all of the marketing is not a huge focus of the game, but as we just heard Joel say, certain points in the deep desert, there are going to be moments where bases are left unshielded and completely vulnerable to attacks. This can mean a lot of things, but seemingly it will be on the table that bases will be raidable in some form, and perhaps enemies will have access to your storage and be able to get into your inventory and take what they want if you're not there to defend yourself.
So let's switch gears a little bit from all the PvP stuff, because that sounds quite compelling and cool. Are there dungeons that I can go into? I know you talked a little bit about an eco lab that you can go into.
Yeah, so I mean, the game is largely a PvE experience, at least for the first, I want to say 80 hours. Some spaces are marked for Canley. That is open PvP. So if you go into a particular shipwreck, you can be attacked by other people. In general, otherwise, the entire map is a PvE experience. We have a journey system. We have a main story that really is about your character and their purpose on Arrakis and kind of following some of the threads that we dangle out there right at the start of the game.
Yeah, the other cool thing about that is because you guys have set that up in kind of a modular way, you can add other scenarios and add different variants and versions of these as you go forward.
Yeah, and if you go back like a long way in Dune lore, there's things like AI being forbidden. It's like, did they steal an AI and bring it to the planet and put it in one of these labs? And have they been researching it beneath the earth? And then they locked it away for 10,000 years? Like, we have these ideas we can experiment with, you know?
Though not everybody is a fan of live service games, as they do tend to overstay their welcome and or evolve into something that is markedly different from the thing that it started out as. This is a cool concept because Dune has a very rich lore and there are a lot of places that the story and the game could go into. So it'll be interesting to see how the game does progress over time, as they do plan to add a lot to it as the months roll out. I can't wait to see what kind of things they have in store for us as players.
Oh, yeah, no, they're actually talking about this. So the server hosting is all done on your guys' end. There's no, like, self-hosted servers or private servers that people can do or anything like that.
Yeah, to play just with your friends and rent your own server and have that running. We're definitely talking about how we can do that. So,
someone in chat wanted to know, when is open beta? When can they expect to be able to play this?
I mean, we're running betas right now. We'll run an open beta sometime when we're closer to, like, launching. We'll figure it out. It'll, you know, I kind of make the joke with the beta players that this is a real beta, right? So expect things to be breaking and, you know, buggy and having issues. Generally, when you want to go to an open beta, you kind of want to be, it's a bit more of a marketing beta. You're a bit more ready to show everybody everything. So we're not quite there yet. We'll see sometime early next year, hopefully.
Sadly, more of the same, and what we already know, there is no current release date for the open beta, at least nothing concrete beyond the early 2025 date that we were given a little bit earlier in the year. We'll have to stay patient and keep our eyes and ears open for any news that comes down the pipeline, but as it sounds right now, they aren't quite ready to enter that phase of open beta. Closed beta testing is ongoing right now, and we will have to wait and see what comes from the new year.
So what about the spice, right? Since everybody's going out there and just trying to get spice, what is this used for game mechanics-wise?
It's used for multiple things. You use it in crafting. You use it for bribing people to see their political agendas. It's actually one of the goals in the Landsraad is actually to deliver the most spice. I don't want to spoil too much, but it certainly drives your character to a certain extent. Like taking spice has an impact on you personally. Let's say that like a part of the universe is about expanding your mind through spice. Certainly as a player, when you reach the planet and start experiencing spice, things change a little for you. But you're essentially, the game starts and you're on a prison transport. You're bound for a Harkonnen slave camp where you're helping them to rebuild the city of Carthage, which was destroyed during the war.
Some interesting info about how spice is going to affect the player, and a little bit of backstory on what the player themselves are doing on Arrakis. It seems like we're actually going to be on the way to a prison camp that is engaged in rebuilding old Carthage, which was exploded during a lasgun shield interaction gone awry. This is a cool plot point for the game. We already knew that we were going to be prisoners on a prison ship, but we weren't exactly sure why we were heading to Arrakis and what the story was involved with that. But now we get a little more light on exactly what's going on with our character on Arrakis. So it's interesting.
Somebody's actually asking about crossplay. Is this something that's going to be PC only? Is it going to be on consoles? Are you going to be able to play between those? What are the options here?
It hasn't been the priority to get the consoles up to parity with the PC yet. PC will be our launch target, and then we'll move to consoles. So it will happen. As for crossplay, that'll kind of be the discussion that happens when we start talking with the platform owners about console stuff. Usually that's when that discussion happens.
Again, more of the same about crossplay. We aren't quite there yet. It seems like they are focused on this PC release before they even start to touch the consoles, and crossplay will follow some point after releasing on PC. So we're just going to have to wait to get more information on that. But it does look like it is in the plans for the game.
I have kind of a personal question. Worm riding when?
I hope before console launch, but worm riding is planned to be something that comes post-launch. Part of the reason for that is just because when we started on this game, Legendary actually didn't want us to show anything Fremen because they were saving the Fremen for the second movie, and they told us like, hey, we don't want you to determine what the Fremen look like for the new universe, which it's fair enough. As the IP holder, they kind of didn't want us. So we kind of put off doing a lot of Fremen stuff until we could see what they had done for the second movie. And at that point, we were quite far in development, so it was like, we're not going to do a ton of Fremen stuff at launch. We're going to do a big Fremen expansion kind of patch.
I can't wait to learn worm riding and then just die 100 times trying to do it.
And that's the other side of it, right? As a game mechanic, it needs to be appropriate. It's also what do you do once you're on a worm? What activity are we giving you to do on a worm that like you can't do with an ornithopter and you can't do on like a fast moving vehicle? We need to have a really good reason for this to exist for you as a player, and we will have that, but we need some time to think about it and make sure it's all mechanically cohesive as well.
Good news for all you would-be Fremen out there. It does sound like worm riding is definitely going to be a feature. It's just going to take a little bit more time in the oven to fully cook and prepare. They want to make sure they do it right, and it was interesting to hear that it needs to be something significantly different from typical vehicle traversal. Otherwise, what would be the point of including it at all other than fan service, where people really obviously want to ride a worm? It just needs to feel right and have a good purpose to it. So keeping the hope alive there, it does look like we're going to see that in the game at some point.
So like you've got that kind of PvE related content, the PvP related content. What do you feel is the end game?
The answer is that like the Landsraad system is an activity driver for Endgame. It will be this faction competition. In the Deep Desert, we have territory control points. We recently added them to the beta that give you points in the Landsraad. Let's say you've chosen to work for House Atreides. You go and talk to the representative from House Argasats. And House Argasats are like, look, man, we're happy to give you our vote in the Landsraad, but we need you to do this thing for us. What's the thing? Go out to the Deep Desert. There's an area out there that we want. It's full of particular resources that we're interested in. Go claim that area for us. If you claim that area for us, we'll give you our vote in the Landsraad on Sunday night. So you go out there as a player, you find the spot, and you start earning points by, classic territory control. You take the spot and you stay there. Thing is, that same guy told the Harkonnen exactly the same thing he told you. So now the Harkonnen are coming to try and claim that spot. So for that week, you might be in territory control. The next week, you go talk to the same guy, and he's like, look, this week, I just need your guild to give me 5 ornithopters. Or there are 10 ecolabs. I need you to go run those 10 ecolabs and bring me back manifests from each of them. I see Endgame as this thing where we continue to add activities, and the Landsraad is kind of the menu that tells you which activities are available. As we continue to update the game post-launch, we'll just keep adding activities. Like, I have a full list of things that I want to add, like a huge list of features that we want to put into the game post-launch.
More on the topic of live service expansive gameplay, it sounds like the Landsraad is going to be sort of chock full of all these different mission types and objectives that they're just going to keep adding to over time. And that's going to increase the replayability and the variability of the PvP endgame. It seems like they might just continue to introduce new ideas and concepts into the gameplay loop that are going to help keep players engaged for a long time. So this is a promising thing to hear from Joel.
I'm interested, though, is with everything being so faction-based, how are you guys going to address faction imbalance? What if everybody goes hard Conan? Because I'm gonna.
The thing is, it's a bit of a spoiler if I talk about the third faction too much, but the third faction will be considered something of a balancing faction. Mechanically, imagine that faction only gets rewarded if the Landsraad ends very close. It only ends if there's 12 for Harkonnen and 13 for Atreides, or vice versa. The third faction has the ability to flip any square. I don't know if I'm going to make it for launch, if we're going to get there in time, which means they might come right after launch. But either way, there is a purpose in the world for this. And yeah, it has been thought about how to do balancing of these kind of systems.
Yeah, because one of the things is players will always find a way to game your system. No matter what, they'll find a way to game it. That's what they do.
This third faction is going to be something of a balancing act that's going to help decide the Landsraad system if the other two houses are in close contention. This is a cool concept because it means that the scales are going to be tippable basically by this third group. If players choose to side with this third faction, they will have a bit of sway in determining who gets to win the Landsraad. Maybe nobody does. Maybe the third faction just gets to be invested in their own interest and come out on top by simply disrupting things. So that's going to be cool to see how the three things interplay. Typically, you'll always have a good and a bad side, but if you introduce three parties into a system, it tends to keep things balanced, like a rock, paper, scissors match. So that's going to be fun to watch play out.
Will you guys be able to have it run on Steam Deck?
So I have an ROG Ally, which is slightly more powerful, I think, but it's not. It's not outside of the realm, and it's fine. I can play it on low with settings turned down, and we haven't even finished optimization for launch, and I can still play it. So I think it's going to be okay on Steam Deck, probably.
Good news for mobile gamers, it does look like Steam Deck is actually going to be something that this game will be able to run on, which is big news. It's not something we really heard even mentioned. I hadn't considered it at all, to be honest, but it does sound like that's something that they have in mind, at least as far as minimum specs goes. The Steam Deck does seem like it's able to handle the game at low settings. So this is going to be cool for people that are on the go and still maybe want to log in and get a couple hours in while they're in between commutes, assuming of course you have some sort of hotspot that can handle the connectivity. And that covers most of the important information. We did cut out a lot, so make sure to go watch the full interview if you do want to hear all of the back and forth between Joel and Thor. I'll let Joel and Thor say goodbye, and then we'll wrap up things.
So is there anything you want to tell chat before we go?
No, thanks everyone for listening. And yeah, I mean, you can sign up for the beta on duneawakening.com, all the usual selling you in on the game stuff. Thank you very much.
Thank you as well.
Well, it's looking like a good close to the year 2024. We don't have any information about the release of Dune Awakening, but we are one step closer every day. And it does seem like we're getting some more solid information about how the game is going to play out, the specific gameplay loops, and just exactly what we're going to be doing on the Dunes of Arrakis. I, for one, am very interested in the things that Joel covered in this interview, and I think Thor asked some good questions that got some information uncovered that we were unsure of. But now it seems like we've got a little bit more information to chew on to hold us over until the start of next year, when hopefully we'll be getting some kind of a beta release or maybe another trailer, some more video footage of raw gameplay, something like that. It's only a matter of time now before Dune hits our PCs, and it's going to be a great time getting out there on the sands with everybody. So this is going to wrap it up for our Dune coverage of this year. I hope everybody has a good holiday season coming up, and I will see you all in the new year. Cheers.